A boutique's unseen battle. The Eloise Paris boutique wasn't just another high-end store. It was an experience, a place where the rich came to bask in exclusivity, where price tags were hidden because those who asked couldn't afford them. Every detail screamed luxury, from the scent of imported cedarwood to the golden embroidery on the velvet drapes. At the heart of it all was Helena, the boutique's unyielding manager. Her sharp eyes scanned every customer, instantly categorizing them as worthy or unworthy. She was the gatekeeper of the elite, and she wore her power like a crown. So when the soft chime of the doorbell rang and a woman stepped inside, dressed in a plain white hoodie, loose sweatpants, and an old cap, Helena's lips curled in immediate disdain. The woman's face was partially hidden by sunglasses, her brown hair tied in a casual bun. She carried no designer handbag, no glimmering jewelry, no telltale signs of wealth. Helena's heels clicked as she approached, her voice laced with condescension. "I believe the clearance section is elsewhere." The woman raised her head slightly, revealing a face that had graced movie screens worldwide. Sandra Bullock. But Helena didn't recognize her. With a tight smile, Helena motioned toward the exit. "Perhaps this isn't the store for you." Sandra's lips twitched into an amused smirk. She had seen this happen before. People judged by appearances, completely oblivious to who they were speaking to. "I was actually looking for something elegant. Maybe a dress." Sandra's voice was calm, but her words were met with a scoff. "Our designs are exclusive," Helena replied, "and quite expensive." Sandra tilted her head, sensing the hostility but deciding to test the waters. "I see. And do you always judge customers by their clothes?" Helena's smile was razor sharp, only when necessary. The exchange had caught the attention of other customers and staff. A hush fell over the room as eyes darted between the two women. A quiet tension hung in the air. Sandra sighed, glancing at the dazzling display of dresses, then back at Helena. She could have easily exposed her identity and shut this woman down. But where was the fun in that? "All right," she said, stepping back. "I'll take my business elsewhere." She turned to leave, but just then, the door chimed again. The moment he stepped inside, the entire room seemed to shift. Tall, effortlessly cool, Keanu Reeves walked in, dressed in his signature black jeans and leather jacket. His presence alone commanded attention. The store went silent. Even Helena stiffened. Sandra froze, eyes widening in disbelief. "Keanu." He spotted her immediately. His face broke into a warm grin as he strode over and, without hesitation, pulled her into a hug. "Sandra," his voice rang through the boutique. "It's been too long." Helena's confident posture wilted in an instant. The entire staff's demeanor changed within seconds. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Oh my God, is that Keanu Reeves? Wait, is that Sandra Bullock?" The realization hit Helena like a freight train. Sandra Bullock, Oscar-winning actress, Hollywood royalty. And she had just humiliated her. But the worst was yet to come. Keanu turned toward Helena, his smile gone. His usually gentle eyes held something else, something that made her feel suddenly very, very small. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Is there a reason why my friend wasn't treated with respect?" Helena stammered, suddenly aware that all eyes were on her. I didn't realize. I thought." "You thought she didn't belong." Keanu's voice was quiet, but it carried enough weight to make Helena's throat tighten. He turned to Sandra, his expression unreadable. "Did you want to buy something?" Sandra, ever the graceful one, gave a small shrug. "I was just looking around, but it seems I wasn't exactly welcome." Keanu didn't even blink before turning to the nearest sales associate. "I'd like to buy out the entire collection." Everything Sandra was looking at. "Ring it up. Right now." The boutique exploded with gasps. Helena visibly paled. The staff scrambled to accommodate Keanu's request, but he wasn't done yet. "And as for you," he said, turning back to Helena. His tone was polite, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Maybe next time, you should treat every customer with kindness. You never know who you're speaking to. Helena stood frozen as Keanu pulled out his black card, the ultimate display of wealth. Sandra chuckled. Keanu, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he replied simply. Then, with a grin, besides, it's about time we go shopping together again. The boutique staff fell over themselves to wrap up the purchases, desperate to correct the mistake. As they walked out together, bags in hand, Sandra leaned in and whispered, "You really didn't have to." Keanu just winked. Sometimes, people need to be reminded that respect should be given freely, not just to those they think deserve it. And with that, they stepped out into the city streets, leaving behind a boutique that would never forget the day they underestimated Sandra Bullock and witnessed the unthinkable from Keanu Reeves. The price of prejudice. The doors of Eloise Paris boutique swung shut behind them, but the shock inside the store lingered like the fading scent of expensive perfume. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock strode down the glittering boulevard, bags in hand, as if nothing had happened. But something had, something that left an unforgettable imprint on everyone inside that boutique. Back inside, Helena stood frozen, her face pale. She had spent years crafting a reputation as an untouchable gatekeeper of luxury, and yet, in mere minutes, Keanu Reeves had dismantled it effortlessly. The whispers from her staff clawed at her ears. How could she not recognize Sandra Bullock? Did you see Keanu Reeves' face? I thought he was going to fire her on the spot. We just lost one of the biggest sales in boutique history because of her. Helena's stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This was a scandal in the making. She felt her phone vibrate. With shaky fingers, she lifted it. A message from her boss. Helena, we need to talk. Immediately. Her breath caught in her throat. Meanwhile, outside on the boulevard, Sandra chuckled as they walked. You really have a habit of causing a scene, don't you? Keanu smirked. Me? You were the one who walked in there looking like an undercover billionaire. Sandra laughed. I was just seeing if the rumors were true. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Rumors? Yeah, she shrugged. I've heard about places like that. Luxury boutiques where the staff treat people differently based on how they look. I wanted to see for myself. Keanu nodded. And? Well, she smirked. It's safe to say the rumors were true. Keanu exhaled, shaking his head. You know, the way I see it, kindness is free. But some people act like it costs a fortune. Sandra smiled at him. That was Keanu, always seeing the world with a kind of wisdom most people ignored. So, Keanu continued, what do we do now? Sandra glanced at the shopping bags in her hands. A playful glint appeared in her eyes. We could donate all of this. Keanu's eyebrows shot up. All of it. Why not? Sandra grinned. I don't need 20 dresses, and I doubt you need 10 silk suits. Keanu chuckled. Fair point, but who do we give them to? Sandra thought for a moment. Then her eyes lit up. I know just the place. Helena's worst nightmare. Back inside Eloise Paris, Helena's hands trembled as she dialed her boss's number. The moment the call connected, she barely had time to say hello before his voice boomed through the phone. Helena, do you have any idea what you've done? She swallowed hard. Sir, do you know how many people have called already? Customers, celebrities. The press is asking if we discriminate against casual-looking clients. Her blood ran cold. Helena, let me make this very clear, her boss growled. Fix this. Now, before this turns into something that destroys our reputation. Click. The line went dead. Helena's heart pounded. This wasn't just about one mistake anymore. Her entire career was on the line. She needed to do damage control. And she needed to find Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. A surprise at the women's shelter. Later that evening, Sandra and Keanu arrived at a women's shelter in downtown Los Angeles. The shelter was modest, but warm, filled with women and children who had left difficult situations behind, seeking a fresh start. When the staff recognized them, there were gasps and murmurs. "Is that Keanu Reeves? Sandra Bullock? Here?" But the two actors didn't stand on ceremony. They simply smiled, walked in, and began unloading dozens of high-end designer outfits. The women and staff watched in shock as Keanu and Sandra personally handed out the luxurious clothing. One young woman, barely 20, clutched a shimmering gown to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes. "I've never owned anything this beautiful before." Sandra touched her hand gently. "Well, now you do." Keanu helped a little girl try on a pair of silk gloves. The child giggled as she twirled, looking like a tiny princess. For Keanu and Sandra, this was the real meaning of wealth: giving, not hoarding. As they handed out the last of the clothing, the shelter's director approached them, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You have no idea what this means to them." Keanu smiled. Sometimes, the best way to teach people a lesson is to turn their mistakes into something good. But just as they were about to leave, the doors to the shelter swung open. There, standing in the doorway, looking pale and desperate, was Helena. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance. "Well," Sandra murmured, "this just got interesting." The reckoning. The moment Helena stepped into the women's shelter, she felt like an outsider. The scent of warm food and the quiet hum of conversation contrasted starkly with the sterile luxury of Eloise Paris, where she had spent years curating an image of exclusivity. Her sharp designer heels clacked against the worn linoleum floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Women, some holding children, others sitting quietly with their newfound dresses, turned to look at her. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and wariness. But it was Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock who made Helena's breath hitch. Sandra sat beside a young woman, helping her adjust the hem of a designer gown that now belonged to her. Keanu was nearby, gently tussling the little girl's hair as she giggled, twirling in a silk dress worth thousands of dollars. Helena's throat tightened. This was her worst nightmare. Not only had she insulted Sandra Bullock, she had just walked into a scene of kindness so pure, so starkly opposite to the world she had built her career around, that she felt sick. She had to fix this. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Sandra, Keanu, I." The words caught in her throat. Keanu turned first, his gaze unreadable. Sandra lifted her head next, her expression neutral, but sharp. "Helena," Sandra said, her voice level. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Women and children who had just been basking in joy sensed the shift in energy. Even the shelter staff stopped in their tracks, watching the tension unfold. Helena swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the expensive Chanel handbag she had instinctively clutched like armor. "I came to apologize," she said at last. Sandra tilted her head slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Did you?" Helena felt her face burn. She had never been in this position before, never had to humble herself in front of a room full of people who weren't her kind. She had been taught that power came from exclusivity, from keeping people out, not letting them in. And yet here she was. Keanu crossed his arms, watching her carefully. He wasn't angry, but he was waiting. Helena's polished confidence wavered. She couldn't afford to mess this up. "I was wrong," she said quickly. "I misjudged you. And I misjudged this entire situation." Sandra didn't speak, waiting. Helena hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "I've worked in luxury fashion for years. I've been trained to cater to a certain type of clientele. And I didn't realize." She stopped herself. The excuse felt wrong. She glanced around the shelter, at the women wearing the very dresses she had once guarded so fiercely. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. These women wore the same gowns she had once deemed too exclusive for the wrong people, and yet they wore them with more grace, more dignity, more appreciation than half the rich socialites who walked through Eloise Paris. Her stomach turned. "I wasn't just wrong," she admitted. "I was cruel." The room remained silent. Keanu studied her, his face unreadable. Sandra exhaled slowly. "And what do you plan to do about it?" Sandra finally asked. Helena blinked. She hadn't expected that question. I don't know." Keanu finally spoke. His voice was gentle but firm. "You could start by changing the way you see people." Helena's breath hitched. "Luxury isn't about labels, Helena," Keanu continued. "It's about how something makes a person feel. And respect. That's priceless." Helena looked down. She had spent years equating worth with price tags. And now, here she was, surrounded by people who had nothing, but who carried more dignity and gratitude than most of her wealthiest clients. Sandra leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Do you really want to fix this, Helena?" Helena nodded, hard. Sandra glanced at Keanu, then back at her. "All right," Sandra said. "Then prove it." Helena's stomach tightened with anxiety. "How?" Keanu smirked. "We have a few ideas." The challenge. By the time Helena left the shelter that night, she had made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Keanu and Sandra had given her an ultimatum, one that forced her out of her comfort zone completely. "You want to prove you've changed," Sandra had said. "Then work with us." "Not at Alois Paris," Keanu had added. "At a place where you'll actually have to see people for who they are." Helena was being sent to work with a charity organization, one that helped struggling young adults find career paths, clothing, and confidence to enter the professional world. It was the opposite of everything she had done at Alois Paris, and it terrified her. For the first time in her life, Helena would not be the one in control, and the thought both humbled and unsettled her. Back at Alois Paris, the next morning, Helena entered the boutique with new eyes. Everything looked different now. The gold-plated hangers, the handcrafted marble floors, the velvet ropes that kept ordinary people out. She had once thought it all screamed power. Now, it just felt small. As she stepped inside, a familiar voice greeted her. "Helena." She turned. Her boss stood there, his expression unreadable. "Well," he asked, "did you fix it?" Helena hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm working on it." Her boss raised an eyebrow. "I need time away from the boutique," she continued. "I need to learn something new." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Take your time, Helena," he said simply. "Come back when you've figured out what kind of person you really want to be." She exhaled, relief flooding her system. And as she stepped outside, for the first time in years, Helena felt free. A lesson in humanity. The moment Helena stepped out of Alois Paris, she felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lift off her shoulders. For years, she had seen herself as an arbiter of luxury, the gatekeeper of exclusivity. Now she wasn't sure who she was anymore. She had agreed to Keanu and Sandra's challenge, to step out of the world of high fashion and into a world she had ignored her entire life. Her car, a sleek black luxury sedan, was parked at the curb. The sight of it, once a source of pride, now made her hesitate. Did she really want to drive up to a charity center in a car worth more than some people made in a year? Her fingers hovered over her phone. Then, with a deep breath, she made a decision. A new beginning at the community center. The next morning, Helena arrived at the Bridge Foundation, a nonprofit that helped struggling young adults find jobs, build confidence, and restart their lives. The building was modest, nothing like the sleek, perfumed walls of Alois Paris. The sign out front was faded. The glass doors were covered in flyers for community events, job postings, and mental health resources. She felt out of place. Stepping inside, she was greeted by the smell of coffee, old books, and something warm, like home. A woman with tired eyes but a warm smile looked up from the front desk. "You must be Helena." Helena straightened. Old habits kicked in. She clasped her hands in front of her, her posture perfect. Yes, I was told to report hereby. Keanu and Sandra. The woman finished, smirking. Yeah, we heard. You're the luxury boutique manager who judged a movie star by her sweatpants. Helena's face burned. The woman held up a hand, cutting her off. Relax. You're here to learn, not to be perfect. Helena hesitated, then nodded. I'm Julia, by the way, the woman continued. I run the career mentorship program here. Come on, let's introduce you to some real people. The first real test. Helena followed Julia down a narrow hallway, past rooms filled with young men and women practicing interviews, writing resumes, and sorting through donated clothes for job interviews. What exactly am I supposed to be doing here? Helena asked. Julia stopped and turned. You tell me. Helena blinked. Excuse me? You worked in a world where people were told what they could and couldn't wear, right? Julia said, where image was everything. Helena hesitated. Yes. Well, you're going to do the opposite of that here. Julia pushed open a door. Inside, a group of young adults, most in their early 20s, sat on worn-out chairs. They looked nervous, fidgeting with their hands, some avoiding eye contact entirely. Julia clapped her hands together. All right, everyone, listen up. This is Helena. She used to run a luxury boutique, but now she's here to help you prepare for job interviews. Helena felt every pair of eyes land on her. A young woman in the front row crossed her arms. What's a rich lady gonna teach us about job hunting? Laughter rippled through the room. Helena froze. She had never been in a room where her presence wasn't automatically respected. She had two options: put up her usual walls and act superior. Actually try to connect. She took a deep breath. I used to think appearances were everything, Helena admitted. That if you didn't wear the right brands or look a certain way, you didn't belong. But I was wrong. The room quieted. What I do know, she continued, is how to make an impression. And in job interviews, that matters. The skepticism didn't vanish, but some of the students leaned in slightly. Julia nodded approvingly. All right, Helena. Let's see what you've got. And just like that, her real challenge began. Helena's wake-up call. For the next week, Helena worked side by side with the students. She helped them pick out outfits from the donation center, giving advice on what colors and cuts looked best. But for the first time in her life, it wasn't about brands. It was about confidence. She held mock interviews, showing them how to speak clearly, how to sit with confidence, how to shake hands without fear. And as she worked, she learned. She learned that most of these young adults had never been given a fair chance. One girl, Ava, had aged out of the foster system and had no money for professional clothes. A young man, Raphael, had been denied jobs over and over simply because of where he grew up. A single mother, Tasha, had been fired from a previous job for missing work to care for her sick child. Helena had spent her life gatekeeping opportunities for the rich, never realizing how many people had doors slammed in their faces simply for existing. It was humbling. It was painful. And it changed her. A familiar face returns. One evening, as Helena finished up a resume workshop, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Looks like you're fitting in just fine. She turned. Keanu Reeves stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with an amused smile. Sandra Bullock stood beside him, smirking. Helena let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. What are you two doing here? She asked. Checking in on you, Sandra said. And from what I see, you're doing more than just checking a box. Helena hesitated, glancing around at the students packing up their things, their faces brighter, their confidence growing. I guess I am, she admitted. Keanu smiled. Good, because we have one more challenge for you. Helena raised an eyebrow. What now? Sandra handed her a small card. It was an invitation, a black tie charity gala. It's time you see luxury from a different perspective, Sandra said. You're not going as a guest, Keanu added. You're going as a voice for them. Helena's stomach tightened. Speaking to the wealthy and powerful was easy when she was selling them exclusivity. But now, she would be asking them to open doors they'd spent their lives keeping shut. For the first time in her life, Helena wasn't afraid of losing her status. She was afraid of failing the people who finally saw her as more than just another gatekeeper. And she wouldn't let that happen. The Gala of Truth. The gilded ballroom shimmered with the glow of crystal chandeliers, casting soft golden hues over the elite of the elite, the kind of people Helena had once catered to without question. The air was thick with exclusivity, the scent of expensive champagne and delicate floral arrangements blending into a perfume of privilege. It was a world she knew well. But tonight, Helena wasn't here to sell a dream of wealth. She was here to break the illusion. A different kind of luxury. As she stood at the entrance, Helena took a deep breath. She was dressed impeccably, a sleek black gown, elegant but understated. Her hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry tasteful but simple. She looked like she belonged. But for the first time, she felt like an outsider in her own world. Nervous? She turned to find Sandra Bullock beside her, effortlessly radiant in an emerald green gown. Sandra's smirk was knowing. It's different when you're not just here to sip champagne, isn't it? She teased. Helena let out a breath. You could say that. Sandra gestured toward the grand ballroom, where men in tailored suits and women in designer gowns floated between waiters carrying trays of imported delicacies. These people live in a bubble, Sandra said. Most of them don't think about the struggles happening right outside their gated mansions. I know, Helena admitted. Then make them listen. Helena nodded, her grip tightening around the speech tucked into her clutch. Keanu Reeves appeared then, dressed in a classic black suit, looking effortlessly cool as always. You ready? He asked. Helena wasn't sure, but it was too late to turn back. The unwelcome guest. As Helena stepped into the ballroom, whispers followed her. She recognized many of the attendees, fashion moguls, CEOs, socialites. They recognized her too. Helena, you're here. She turned to see Madeleine Laurent, a wealthy patron of Eloise Paris, approaching with a practiced smile. I didn't expect to see you tonight, Madeleine said, sipping her champagne. I heard you. Took some time away. There was an edge to her tone, a polite way of saying, I heard you humiliated yourself. Helena held her ground. I did, she said evenly. I've been working with the Bridge Foundation. Madeleine's brows lifted. A charity. Helena smiled. Yes, helping young adults prepare for careers. Many of them have never been given a fair chance. Madeleine tilted her head, clearly unimpressed. That's noble, she said, before leaning in with a fox-sympathetic whisper. But surely you don't plan to stay in that world forever, do you? Helena's jaw tightened. The condescension, the assumption that helping others was beneath her. The old Helena might have smiled and played along. But she wasn't that person anymore. Actually, Helena said smoothly, I plan to change a few things, starting with how people like you see that world. Madeleine blinked. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the air. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The evening speakers are about to begin. Helena's heart pounded. This was it, the speech that changed everything. As she stepped onto the stage, Helena felt the weight of 1,000 judgments on her shoulders. The room was filled with powerful people who lived in luxury, but rarely acknowledged the people who made it possible. She adjusted the microphone. Good evening, she began, her voice steady. Most of you know me as the former manager of Eloise Paris. I spent years curating exclusivity, ensuring only the right people walked through our doors. A murmur rippled through the audience. Helena let it settle before continuing. But what if I told you that everything I believed about luxury was a lie? Silence. Eyes locked on her, curiosity shifting into something deeper. I used to think luxury was about price tags, about status, she said. But after spending time with the Bridge Foundation, I learned that true luxury, the kind that lasts, is opportunity. A pause. It's the luxury of getting a second chance, the luxury of being seen, of being given a fair shot at success. And that's something many of you in this room have never had to fight for. The polished faces of the elite stiffened. Helena didn't stop. I used to decide who was worthy of stepping into my boutique. But now I see the truth. Luxury is meaningless if it only exists for the privileged few. Keanu and Sandra sat in the front row, watching proudly. Helena took a deep breath. So tonight, I ask you, will you keep your doors shut, or will you use your wealth, your influence, to open them? She let the question linger. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others looked thoughtful. And then Keanu Reeves stood up. He clapped. Loud, purposeful. Sandra joined him. Then more hands joined in. Soon, the entire ballroom was applauding. Helena felt her chest tighten. Not because of the applause, but because this was the first time she had ever truly spoken from the heart. And it had mattered. A new path. By the end of the night, donations flooded in for the Bridge Foundation. Some of the wealthiest guests, people who had never considered supporting job programs, stepped forward to fund scholarships, mentorships, and career training. But Helena didn't need their approval, because for the first time, she had found her purpose. As she stepped outside, breathing in the crisp night air, Keanu and Sandra joined her. You did good, Helena, Sandra said. Keanu nodded. Proud of you. Helena felt something stir inside her, a feeling she had never found in all her years at Eloise Paris. Satisfaction. Not from wealth, but from finally doing something that mattered. So what now? Sandra asked. Helena exhaled. Now, she said, now I make sure the doors stay open for everyone. And with that, she walked away from the world she once knew, toward the life she was finally meant to live. The road to redemption. The night of the gala had changed everything. Helena had stood before the world of luxury, the people who once ruled her life, and told them the truth. She had expected backlash. Instead, she had sparked something bigger than she ever imagined. The fallout. The next morning, Helena's speech was everywhere. Articles flooded the internet. Former luxury boutique manager calls out the industry's elitism at star-studded gala. Helena's powerful words spark a movement for equal opportunities. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock back, a new kind of luxury, the luxury of opportunity. Helena sat in her small apartment, scrolling through the reactions. Some were positive. Finally, someone inside the industry admitting what we've all known for years. Respect to Helena for standing up and using her voice for change. But there were plenty of critics too. She turned her back on the industry that made her. Sounds like someone's bitter about losing her job. If she hates luxury so much, why was she at a fancy gala? Helena sighed. She had spent years curating an image of perfection, and now, the very world she once belonged to was turning against her. But she had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the message from her former boss, an offer she never saw coming. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Helena. The voice was cold, clipped, familiar. I assume you know who this is. She straightened. Yes, sir. Her former boss, the owner of Eloise Paris, the man who had built the empire she once ruled. I saw your little speech last night, he said. Quite the performance. Helena braced herself. I meant every word. A pause. Then, something she didn't expect. Good. Helena blinked. Excuse me. Come to my office, he said. We need to talk. And just like that, the past came knocking. A tempting proposition. Helena walked into Eloise Paris for the first time since she had left. It was strange. The boutique hadn't changed, but she had. The scent of expensive perfume, The pristine displays, the whispered exclusivity of it all. It no longer felt like home. She was led upstairs, where her former boss sat behind his marble desk, his expression unreadable. "I'll be direct," he said. "You made waves last night. Our PR team is scrambling. Investors are asking if Eloise Paris is part of the problem." Helena crossed her arms. "Are you?" He smirked. "That's exactly why you're here." She wasn't expecting what came next. "Come back," he said, "not as a boutique manager. As a consultant. Help us reshape our image." Helena stared at him. "You want me to fix the damage I caused?" she asked bluntly. "I want you to use that passion of yours," he corrected. "Eloise Paris doesn't need to change, but the world is watching. We need to evolve. You could lead that evolution." Helena felt the weight of the offer. This was her old world, reaching out a hand. The salary would be massive. The prestige, undeniable. A year ago, she would have jumped at the chance. But now she had seen what was on the other side of the door. She thought of Ava, who had finally landed a job after struggling her whole life. She thought of Raphael, who had been overlooked simply because of his background. She thought of Tasha, who had been fired just for being a mother. Could she really go back to a world that had ignored people like them? She took a deep breath. "I appreciate the offer," she said slowly. His eyes narrowed. "But," Helena met his gaze. "But I don't want to change Eloise Paris," she said. "I want to build something new." His expression shifted. Surprise, then amusement. "I see," he murmured. "You think you can create a better version of what we do." "Not better," Helena said. "More meaningful." She stood up. "I spent years guarding a door that shut people out," she said. "Now, I want to open as many doors as I can." She turned to leave. "Helena." She stopped. "You'll regret this." She smiled. "I don't think I will." And with that, she walked away, for good this time. The birth of something new. Helena didn't waste time. With Keanu and Sandra's help, she began work on a brand new initiative, one that combined everything she had learned. A fashion house that wasn't built on exclusion, but empowerment. Tailored for change. A company that provided affordable professional clothing for people re-entering the workforce, offered mentorship programs for young designers from underrepresented backgrounds, created a line of high-end fashion that gave back, where proceeds went directly to career programs for those in need. It was bold. It was risky. And the fashion industry hated it. The industry strikes back. The moment Tailored for Change was announced, the backlash was immediate. Luxury fashion isn't charity. Helena's naive idea won't last a year. People don't buy expensive clothes to feel generous. They buy them to feel exclusive. Investors mocked her. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Even Eloise Paris released a statement, subtly dismissing her efforts as misguided activism. But something else happened too. People started paying attention. The same young adults she had worked with at the Bridge Foundation started sharing their stories. Influential figures backed her mission. And then the unexpected happened. A new order arrived. From someone who had once doubted her the most. An order from the past. Late one evening, as Helena was finalizing designs for the first Tailored for Change collection, an email popped up. Subject: Custom Order Inquiry. She clicked it. Her breath caught. It was from Madeleine Laurent, the same woman who had mocked her at the gala. The message was short. "Helena, I need a custom piece for an upcoming event. Not Eloise Paris. Not Dior. Something from your new line." Helena stared at the screen. And then she smiled. Because this wasn't just an order. This was proof that she had started something real. And she wasn't stopping now. A revolution in silk and steel. The order from Madeleine Laurent sat in Helena's inbox, glowing like a beacon of irony. A woman who had once mocked her now wanted a custom piece from Tailored for Change. It would have been easy to reject it, to prove a point. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about change. Helena took a deep breath, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The first true collection. The Tailored for Change showroom was nothing like Eloise Paris. There were no velvet ropes, no whispers of exclusivity. Instead, there was life. Young designers sketching ideas, former Bridge Foundation students working on fabrics, and a constant buzz of creativity with a purpose. Every piece they created had a story. A coat lined with motivational words stitched inside, reminders of resilience. Dresses made from upcycled high-end materials, proving luxury didn't have to be wasteful. Suits designed for confidence, tailored at cost for people heading into their first job interviews. This wasn't just a clothing line. It was a statement, and Madeleine Laurent was about to become its first major client. A fitting with old shadows. When Madeleine arrived at the showroom, she looked as polished as ever, draped in couture, walking with the practiced ease of someone who had always belonged to the world of the elite. But as her eyes scanned the bright, open space, something shifted. This wasn't like Eloise Paris. There was no forced luxury, just passion, dedication, and real talent at work. She pursed her lips. "I assume you have something ready for me." Helena nodded, pulling a garment bag from a nearby rack. She unzipped it, revealing a stunning deep sapphire gown, simple in its elegance, but breathtaking in its craftsmanship. Madeleine lifted a brow. "It's exquisite." Helena smirked. "I know." Madeleine reached out, running her fingers over the fabric. "It feels different," she murmured. Helena crossed her arms. "That's because it's designed with purpose. The silk is ethically sourced. The embroidery was done by one of our new artisans, a woman who spent years being turned away from this industry because she didn't come from the right background." Madeleine hesitated. For the first time, she seemed thoughtful. "So, you're really serious about all this," she finally said. Helena chuckled. "Did you think I was playing dress-up?" Madeleine smirked, but there was no malice in it this time. "I underestimated you," she admitted. Helena held her gaze. "People like you always do." A long pause. Then, to Helena's surprise, Madeleine nodded. "I'll take it," she said. "And I'll make sure people see it." Helena tilted her head. "Why?" Madeleine exhaled. "Because whether I like it or not, you've started something, and I have a feeling it's only going to get bigger." Helena smiled. "You have no idea. The industry's counterattack." Days later, the headlines hit. Fashion elite pushback against activist luxury. Tailored for Change faces harsh criticism from major brands. Can high fashion survive a movement that rejects exclusivity? Eloise Paris released their own statement, subtly dismissing Helena's work as idealistic but impractical. A few other luxury brands followed, calling the movement a trend that would fade. Helena expected it, but she wasn't ready for what happened next. An unexpected betrayal. She was in the middle of a fitting session when her assistant rushed in, phone in hand. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. Helena grabbed the phone. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Anonymous source leaks financial struggles of Tailored for Change. Can it survive? Helena felt ice flood her veins. She scanned the article. Private financial records. Internal reports. It painted the company as unstable, unsustainable. The public backlash was instant. Investors panicked. Customers hesitated. And then she saw it, a single line buried at the bottom of the report. The information comes from an insider close to the company. Helena's heart pounded. Someone had betrayed her. But who? And why? The turning point. She didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock arrived at her office, both looking tense. "We have a problem," Sandra said, tossing a folder onto the table. Helena opened it. Inside were emails, messages, and leaked documents, all leading back to a single person, someone inside her own company. Helena's stomach twisted as she read the name. It was one of her former boutique colleagues, someone she had once considered a friend. And worse, the leak had been orchestrated by Eloise Paris. They were trying to kill her company before it could rise. She looked up at Keanu and Sandra, fire in her eyes. "They think they can shut me down," she said. Keanu smirked. "They don't know who they're dealing with." Helena exhaled, then stood. "Then it's time to fight back." She picked up her phone and made the call that would change everything. The final move. The next morning, Helena stood before a packed room of journalists. Cameras flashed. Microphones were poised. This was her moment. She took a deep breath and began. "I won't waste time denying the reports," she said. "Yes, Tailored for Change is a startup. Yes, we face challenges. But do you know what's different about us?" She let the silence stretch. "We're not afraid of change." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Luxury fashion has spent decades building walls, deciding who gets in and who stays out. We're tearing those walls down. And of course, that scares people. She smiled. Because for the first time, power is shifting. A wave of whispers and nods spread through the room. But she wasn't done. Eloise Paris and others think they can shut us down. That by exposing our struggles, they'll make us back down. She leaned forward. "They're wrong." Then she dropped the bombshell. "In response to this attack, we're launching something new, an open-access luxury line, where anyone can submit a design, where creativity, not privilege, determines success." The room exploded in questions. Helena held her ground. She wasn't just fighting back. She was starting a revolution. And this time, the industry would never be the same again.